All right. Woods 2 students, you're going to cut a taper, actually 2 tapers on your table legs. You're going to cut them on the inside. The inside faces are the same as the faces that have the mortise on them. So we marked these out. Remember, we had an M and a T. All right, that T is for taper. In order to cut a taper, let's first start by identifying what that is exactly. We have a sample table leg here. You can see that it is approximately 2 by 2 1/4, so it is actually rectangular, unlike ours, which are square. And then down at the bottom of the leg, that taper is smaller. Okay, and this is probably about 1 1/4 by 1 3/8. So we're just cutting it so that it's thicker and wider at the top, and it tapers down to a smaller dimension at the bottom. On my table leg, you can see I've got them marked out here. We want our taper to start below the mortise. I've got a line drawn here. And we want our taper to allow for about 1.5 inches thickness at the bottom. So we're not taking a lot off. You can see that the marked out section on those 2 faces would be the marked out part that we cut off. All right, 1.5 inches by 1.5 inches. Now to do that, we need to use a taper jig. And really all this is a apparatus to hold a piece of wood while we cut it on the table saw. The side here without the cleat goes against the fence, and then our workpiece is held right here next to the cleat. We can adjust the angle of the taper by loosening this wing nut and opening or closing for the angle. Since our table legs are different lengths, I'm going to go through the setup process for the taper jig without giving any specific dimensions. We could say that we're going to have a certain degree or angle for our cut, and we could say that we're going to cut off a certain number of inches per feet. And then I could give you the angle, and I could give you the location of the fence for the table saw, but since they're all different, we're just going to go through the process of setting it up for ourselves. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure that our blade height is set correctly, and that means that it needs to be above the surface that we're cutting. So our blade height is set correctly. And then we're going to put our table leg in the taper jig. Now you see if I push this forward, the blade's making contact right here, so that's below my line. All right. And if I were to take this out and bring this over here, I could measure that distance, and I would know how much material I was taking off. In this case, I'm close to that 1.5 inch, but I'm definitely not starting where I want to start. So I'm going to take this taper jig, I'm going to bring it so it's a little bit closer together. When I do this, I'm going to move this incrementally, take a little bit off. Now, I moved that in. If I put my leg back into the jig, now I'm not cutting until I get down here, which means I got to move the fence over. So move the fence over. About there. All right, now the table leg is in the cleat. If I push this forward, I'm starting to cut right near my line, which is great. And if I measure the distance between the blade and the taper jig, I'm at right about 1.5 inches. So that's exactly where I want it to be. I will do one test cut to double check to make sure that it is set up exactly how I want it. Okay, so I've made that cut. I want to walk you through the process of hand placement for making the taper jig cuts. Now, first off, obviously the guard's going to be down, but I want to have my thumb and index finger on my right hand holding the workpiece down against the table, and I want to have my middle finger, my ring finger on the taper jig. That's going to hold all of that against the table. I then have my left hand holding onto the handle right back here and pushing forward. Just like any rip cut, continue that process of sliding your hand back and pausing until you finish the cut by pushing this end of the taper jig all the way out past the back of the blade. Okay, if we go back to my workpiece, I have started the cut right here, so right below my line, which is about where I wanted to be. I can sand off that marker line, that's not a problem. And if you look at the end, I cut off all of that material that was cut on an angle. So I will then go ahead and turn this and make the next cut, which brings me to my next point, which is very important. The orientation of the leg for the cuts that you're going to make needs to be done in a very particular manner, and that is this. The first cut you make has the mortise and then the taper facing the blade, and the second mortise and taper facing down. So you can see all of my work pieces that are on this side of the fence are laid out in that configuration. One mortise facing the fence, one mortise facing the table. So I can pick them up and I can put them in the jig and I can make repetitive cuts. If I were to do it in the opposite direction or opposite orientation, with the mortise facing up and the mortise facing the blade, I would cut the first one here and then I would push that down against the table and I'd cut the second one. In doing so, I would then have a uneven workpiece. All right? So to keep that from rocking back and forth while you're cutting it, orientate your legs with one mortise facing the fence and the other mortise facing down. I'll go ahead and make the rest of these cuts and we'll see the legs as they are in their finished tapered state. Okay, you can see here it's assembled, unsanded, unglued and clamped state. I've got my pocket holes cut on my long rails. My short rails are too short to really necessitate pocket holes, and I've got the tapers cut on the insides of all the legs. All right. So the outsides are straight and the inside has the taper. The taper here is pretty slight. It goes from being, inch and about 13/16 or inch and 7/8 to about inch and a half. And as long as your legs are square, you're going to be in good shape in making sure that those tapers are identical.